If you want to see how we completely transform this old, sad laminate flooring in just one day from this to this, we'll keep on watching. Let it start.
One of the areas where we spend the most time in any home is the kitchen. And unfortunately, in this kitchen, it came with numerous layers of sheet vinyl and none of them are actually eye appealing. So let's do some demo and completely change this entire kitchen within a day. I first start removing the old wood base, and this stuff is not going to be salvaged because it is dated and, as you can see, comes apart fairly easy. These old aluminum floor transitions are also coming up, and something that's going to be matching our wood flooring is going to be much more inviting than this beautiful gold color. Unfortunately, when I did remove this transition, I quickly realized that there are not just 2 layers, but 3 layers of laminate. And once I started cutting into it, I quickly realized there was going to be an issue.
Okay, there's 1, 2, 3 layers of laminate, and this doesn't look good. That looks like asbestos adhesive. Not a good sign. So, let's get it tested.
Asbestos building materials were very prevalent in houses built between 1930 to 1980. Now that's not always the case, but vinyl tile and adhesives were a large contributor in asbestos, which is why I tested it, and I'm glad I did, because the second layer did come back positive with asbestos. But the good thing about asbestos is the fact that as long as it's encased properly and particles are not becoming airborne, it's extremely safe to be around, and I can easily just remove this top layer that does not have asbestos and then just go right over the tile that does. The only issue with this is that it increases the height of the kitchen floor area and won't actually be the same elevation of our wood flooring that we're trying to match to, but that's okay on this particular project. However, on your project, if you did want the same elevation and wanted this laminate flooring completely removed, you are most likely going to need to pay for someone to come out and remove it properly. Most states here in the United States actually require that you have a licensed removal company come out and do it for you, mainly due to proper disposal practices, as well as your general health safety, of course. Now that we've taken care of the demo, we can move on to flooring. Now this is our luxury vinyl plank from Pergo, which does have a pad on the back side. But before we even get to installation, we have to start installing our underlayment. Now this is specifically called out as Quiet Walk LV, which again is perfect and designed for luxury vinyl plank. And you might be wondering, why do we need an underlayment when there's already a pad attached to the back side of this luxury vinyl plank? Well, it's because 1, it provides more sound deadening between floors, as well as comfortability and a number of other different benefits that I'll be getting to shortly. But let's get to installation. The product is made up of 2 materials. The base itself is called out as Quick Walk Fibers, which is made up of recycled materials, and the top layer is a vapor barrier. I roll it out onto the floor, and as you can see, it cuts extremely smoothly with a utility knife. I line up the pad on one side, and I actually use a couple staples just to secure it in place while I stretch it across the room in order to make the installation process even easier due to the fact that it won't move now that it's stapled in place. Now that it's secured, I cut off any excess with a utility blade, running it right across the wall, which makes it a perfect fit. I roll out the second piece of underlayment, flip it around, and then make sure that we have the proper tabs associated with each other. There are 2 different tabs. One has an adhesive backer, and the other one has an overlapping vapor barrier edge. I remove the protective strip on the adhesive backer and then apply the secondary edge right on top of it so it has a perfect seam all the way down. This is a very nice feature that's built into the Quiet Walk LV product, and you can just leave it like this. However, if you want a little bit more seam durability, I would suggest applying a secondary layer of adhesive in order to guarantee that these seams are not going anywhere. And with that note, I want to say a special thank you to the sponsor of this week's video, Quiet Walk Luxury Vinyl, made by MP Global Products. MP Global uses recycled fiber materials to make floor underlayments that I have actually personally used for years. They recently reached out and wanted to be a sponsor of a video, and since I knew and trusted their products, I was happy to oblige. As I noted earlier, there are a number of reasons to use an underlayment like this, including sound deadening, moisture protection, thermal insulation, and of course promotes moisture dissipation if this is on a concrete slab. Plus, I personally find an underlayment actually provides a much more natural feel as you walk across your luxury vinyl plank floor. If you don't, it seems to be more uneven and noisy, but after you apply an underlayment like this, it does somehow provide a more natural feel. If you want to check out this amazing product or any of their other amazing products, then please check out the link in the description box below. Now that we have our underlayment taken care of, we can move on to flooring. And before we actually start cutting and installing, one of the best things to do before you do that is to actually lay out the tiles across the room so you don't have any odd small sections at one end or the other. This small step just takes a few moments to do and can save you from some dreaded headaches down the road. Just try and keep that in mind before installation. But now let's get to installation. The first step is to actually figure out where you want to work from. And this corner spot right next to the cabinets is exactly where I want to start because I want to start right where one of the entry points is going to be placed. There are a number of tools to use when it comes to cutting. However, my favorite is actually the table saw. One, because you can get perfect strips of material completely removed at very long lengths, and these tiles come 24 inches by 12 inches, which is a sizable piece. In order to fit these tiles perfectly underneath the door trim, I actually take my multi-tool and use one of the tiles to prop up my blade so I have a perfect height in order to place these tiles tightly underneath the door trim. In order to have a full piece right at the doorway, I'm actually going to cut my first row in half, and that will dictate where the pattern starts on that first row, and then we can move on to full pieces in the second row. On most projects, you're going to have to work around unique angles, and on this project is no different because we have to start right around the cabinetry right here. I mark a few measurements while I'm in the kitchen, then take it to my table saw, define the lines more significantly with my speed square, and then start cutting. By using the table saw fence as a guide really allows me to get perfect lines all the way down the tile, and keep in mind that each one of these pieces doesn't have to be cut absolutely perfect because wall base is going to be going right over it, and any gappage that has to be accounted for will be covered up with the wall base eventually. If you haven't installed luxury vinyl tile before, it's very quick and straightforward. There's obviously 4 sides to each tile, but there's only 2 different side profiles per tile. In simplistic terms, this is basically just a male and female section, and the male section has to go into the female section. The trick is to get 2 sides to click into place when installing each tile. And of course, one side is always going to be easier to install than the other because of the way they click into place. And that's where the tools of the trade come into play because I'm using a long pull bar and a small sledgehammer to provide a few love taps and nudge each one perfectly into place. There might be points where you actually have to notch out a small section into each panel, which you can do in numerous different ways, and I'll show you how I do it later on in the video. But just keep in mind that a small cutout can easily be done with a table saw. If you find yourself in oddly shaped areas like these, just keep in mind that one edge is all you need to start, and then you can always tap in that second edge as needed. Plus, that's also another reason why this large pull bar is so nice to have because it protects the edge as you hammer because it distributes that pressure across the entire blade width of your pull bar. And after doing this numerous times, rest assured that having a proper edge that is not damaged is key to have ease of installation, because if you don't, it's going to be much more difficult to get a proper edge into those seams because it's a click-in method. At certain points, in order to actually fit a piece underneath a piece of trim or other type of obstacle, you actually have to click it into place outside of where it actually needs to be, and then hammer it into position. In this circumstance, I actually had to hammer it so it went underneath our door trim, and that way it slid perfectly into place. Now that we're finally past the doorway, I'm able to add a few shims to the wall, and that way it's much less likely that these tiles will move on us as we're pounding them in position. As for tile installation pattern, I want a standard running bond pattern. In simplistic terms, that means each row is going to stop and land in between the center of each adjacent row next to it. It provides stability and strength for this entire system, and if the edges were too close together, that might actually become a weak point later on after you continuously walk on it for years. As I noted earlier, if there are areas where you actually need to notch out a small section on one of these pieces of flooring, you can easily do it with your table saw and cut small linear strips so you can easily snap off. Then all you have to do is lower it into position, give it a few love taps, and you have a perfectly fit piece. One other method of installation is actually inserting the side first and then maneuver the back edge into place. And in all honesty, I found this to be actually easier than installing the back side first and then pounding the side into place. So please keep that in mind in your installation process. In order to guarantee that our seams would stay in place continuously all the way through and making sure that we had that running bond pattern, I actually made a small mark with tape to guarantee that we have a center point at every single location. And I'm glad I did this because this room is not perfectly square, and therefore if I didn't do it, our pattern would be slightly ajar versus perfectly in line. Another quick tip is to actually install a couple pieces at once and then insert them into position, especially at the very beginning of a row, because it's much easier to do it now versus trying to hammer them in place later on. In fact, the side installation method actually worked so well that I sometimes didn't even have to use my pry bar. I could easily position and push it into place with no need of using my pry bar or hammer, which was definitely an added bonus. This is obviously a kitchen, which means that I'm working around some large appliances, like a refrigerator, in order to guarantee ourselves that I wasn't going to damage the edge profile of these tiles that were already installed. I actually positioned a small piece of scrap where the wheels were located, and that way I guaranteed that our edge profile was not going to be damaged once I rolled over it. Once the large appliances were out of the way, I made quick work of the installation process, and in all honesty and full disclosure, as I noted before, you can do this in a day. However, I did take 2 days to install, but they were 2 short days. I worked approximately 6 hours each day, which means I had a total of 12 hours. So you can definitely take on this project, and that's included in the fact that I installed this while also recording it, which means it definitely took me much longer to do since I was recording versus me just installing. So please keep that in mind. Once you make it to the final row, it's actually easy to use the wall as leverage. In this case, I'm using a chisel to push it against, and therefore I'm pushing the tile into the adjacent tile next to it. As you make your way closer and closer to the doorway, you quickly realize that you're going to have to get a little creative with this endeavor, and that's because I'm working with an opening as well as trim around a door. If it was just a wall, it'd be very easy to install the last couple pieces, but in this case, I don't have that luxury. In this circumstance, I have to install the piece much further down the row and then hammer it down into position. This is actually quite easy and straightforward as far as the install goes. You just need to make sure that you have the proper length needed in order to have those seams match up perfectly. As for our last and final piece, I do have to get a little more creative on this one because I still have to fit it into that back edge, but I can't do it all the way because I'm overlapping the adjacent piece next to it. So I have to make sure that I'm not damaging the edge while hitting it in place, but also fit it snugly all the way underneath the trim, and then give a final few love taps at the dead center of our seam, which will finish off the installation. Now, let's get to trim. For trim, we're just using a standard 3.5 inch tall MDF trim, which we do want to paint prior to installing. One coat of paint is just fine for wall base. Just make sure you apply one even coat to the top edge as well as the front edge of the board. And as you can see, I made myself nice and cozy down where the princess dresses and dinosaurs are. I did this at the very beginning of the day, so as I was installing the flooring, it was drying, and once I was done with the flooring, I could install the trim. I cut 45-degree mitered corners at any location where the base was going to meet another piece of base, and any time where the base was going to be propped up next to a piece of door trim, as you see right here, was just cut at a 90-degree angle. As for fastening this base, I'm using a 23 gauge pin nailer, which provides plenty of strength, and you don't really even need to fill these holes. They're so small, which is very nice. In our circumstance, we actually have a small floor vent underneath our sink cabinet, and in order to make this as quick and easy as possible, all I have to do is drill 4 holes and cut each side with my jigsaw. Position the piece accordingly, maybe give it a few love taps, and then nail it into place. Once all the trim is taken care of, I then proceed to installing some caulk. Now this isn't an end-all be-all must-all, but personally I find this provides a very professional look and feel, especially when you're in a kitchen, because you know there's going to be plenty of spills along the way, and we don't want anything falling back behind our beautiful trim. Like always, if you're interested in purchasing any of the tools or materials seen in this video, I'll make sure and leave a link in the description box below. The final step of this entire project is to install our transition strip. Now I did want a nice transition strip that had a nice cohesive look and feel with the wood flooring, and I was able to find this one at my local Home Depot that matched our oak flooring almost near perfectly. If you cut this piece snugly enough, you don't even need to use nails or glue. But if you don't, or you want something a little bit more secure, you can always use some construction adhesive and some pin nails as well. This will add plenty of structural support for this transition, and with that said, we are done with this amazing transformation. I absolutely love how this entire floor system turned out. The fact that we were able to completely transform this entire kitchen floor in such a short amount of time is truly remarkable, and one project that I'm proud to say is one beautiful, sexy beast of a transformation. Oh yeah.